our last meeting. I would entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
I so move.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye, and a roll call. John King. John says aye too. It's unanimous. And I guess next is the update on legislation. Is Genevieve on this call yet? Can't
No,
see.
she's not.
I don't think she is yet.
Oh, there, Genevieve.
Here she comes.
Stuck in traffic.
Hey, Genevieve, how are you?
I'm good. How are you? I'm sorry I didn't have the meeting link. And I am driving home from Augusta, so that's the reason for my profile photo and not my face today. I assume you've gotten to the part of the agenda where you'd like to have a legislative update.
Yeah, you assume correct. Have at it.
All right. All right, so the hearing for LD 841 went very well. There was a good turnout. I did not expect, but was pleasantly surprised to see the Senate President, Maddie Daughtry, there to weigh in. She represents Chebeague Island, so was there to represent their interest and has taken an interest in coastal and island communities and their needs. So that was very nice. One of my takeaways from that, and a point that we really need to shore up and make it before the work session. So DOT testified neither for nor against, and their position was that this legislation is unnecessary if the ferries, that this was driven by, overnighting where the ferries overnight, which is true to a degree, and that this legislation is unnecessary if that issue is resolved. However, it is my understanding, and I will certainly turn to you for your experience, that the delivery of emergency services and transportation, this is an issue that existed before this conversation. I mean, I'm aware of the efforts from the Island Institute and others and conversations that have been ongoing for many years about who responds. Is it the ferry? Is it Life Flight? Is it? So in my opinion, and certainly to be led by you, there is still a need for this working group, and there is still value in having this working group and this resolve move forward, even if the ongoing impression. But I turn to you both to confirm if that's the pursuit that you would like to take, and also I need information about how this was one of the committee questions that I said that I would bring to the work session, about the existing process for determining who responds. I have a precursory knowledge of that just from my involvement with the islands over the years, but to really drill down into what those agreements look like with Life Flight, with the ferry service, and with Penobscot Island Air. So that was my feedback. And the Bangor Daily News mistakenly reported that the hearing didn't happen and that the bill was carried over. I did see that and send a correction to them last night. So now that is updated. It's a little confusing. All of the active pieces of legislation say carried over, but that is because the legislature is in special session. So it's an honest mistake made by the journalist that has been corrected, because I had a number of questions last night through Facebook asking me if there was a hearing or not, and I didn't understand where people were getting that impression. So there was a hearing. Nobody testified in opposition. The only neither for nor against was the department, and they were fairly balanced, I would say. And I have a copy of their testimony. They were very willing to share their position. Otherwise, we are still waiting on those two regulatory oversight bills to be printed. The first draft hasn't come back from the revisor's office to the sponsors. When those bills are printed, then there will be Ferry Day in the Transportation Committee. I did speak with Representative Matlack about her bill and if she was open to amendments, if we had any suggestions for language. She was very open to that. And we're playing a little bit of a waiting game still as far as when the public hearings for the rest of the bills will be scheduled. And there is quite a bit of attention. WABI was there, the Bangor Daily News reported it. So I was good to see that media attention, because it does put some pressure on lawmakers to not only act on this issue, but also to just have it on their radar that this is important and it's pending and it's something that people are paying attention to.
Great. Thank you for that update. I mean, I think the issue with emergency response has existed before the discussion about where to berth ferries. And even in my time on the advisory board, there was a change in emergency response after hours and whether or not the captains were required to call and get permission ahead of time from the Coast Guard. I think that's happened. I can't remember when I started, when the last, I bet 5 years or so, that just that shift in who's calling and what they're supposed to be doing. Fred would be better. He's not here right now, but he'd be the best to answer that in terms of how they handle who they call for what particular emergencies. And I know Life Flight has a very specific set of criteria of when they will come and try to fly somebody off of an island. The ferry, I think, is more about weather considerations. If a small boat is not suitable for the weather, or whether a patient needs to be in an ambulance, which is often, if it's possible, better than going on a small boat where you have limited resources, limited equipment to, depending on the situation, whatever a person might need. I mean, Fred will know more than me about exactly what's in an ambulance, but it's a lot more than a boat that's not equipped for emergency response. It's just a passenger boat. And so I think that's an ongoing issue. Well before the berthing issue, there were conversations here about building and maintaining a high-speed emergency response boat. That's been an ongoing conversation that I know Earl was involved in early on, and that's certainly before this. So these conversations are, maybe coming to a head more so because of the concern of having a ferry off island during an emergency. But these conversations have existed before, and I think it's certainly my understanding from talking and listening to Fred at our meetings here is that Fred would really like to see something that is guaranteed for emergency response, or as close as can be, right? You still have weather issues, but getting something that is more than whoever might be able to take them, and you call and you hope that someone will go. And that system has sort of worked out for, a long time, but it's not really the ideal, certainly in the emergency response world. And so I know Fred is hoping that we can get either language in the tariff or in the contract with the ferry service employees. And so I think that's an issue. It existed before. Will continue to exist whether or not the ferries are berthed on the islands. There's obviously, it's a different issue if the ferries are off island, and it's a different issue, depending on the island, if the ferries are berthed off island too, I think. Just because we're pretty close, and, North Haven, Vinyl Haven might be an hour and a half for a ferry, even to get there, to pick somebody up with to drop them off again. So it's a little more nuanced, but I think certainly the issue is live, whether or not the ferries are on the island, berthed on the island or not. I mean, that's my 2 cents, but I'll throw it out to you.
Yeah, I mean, the ferry with the ambulance is pretty much always the best choice in any kind of injury. Dealing with the ramps, getting someone on and off the boat, get to Lincolnville, maybe there's other boats in the way, tide issues, ferry is pretty much always the best option. So,
Well, thank you for confirming. That is my understanding of the issue. So thank you for confirming that, and let's put our heads together and see what I can send. I can email documents to the committee and so on and so forth. It's a nuanced issue. It's a niche issue. So rather than talking at people, I really want to put together something written that I can send to lawmakers for their consideration so that they have a better understanding. So I will work on that and make sure that we get that to the members of the committee before the work session.
Yeah, Carrie, are you aware? I'm sort of envisioning that Fred might even have kind of a decision tree that's in writing that might be easy to share. I'm not sure. I've just heard him talk through it, but it made me think that he did have something kind of pretty formal in writing about the process that he uses that he could share pretty easily.
I think he has a decision tree right down to all of the people locally who he might call in order of preference of, like, who am I going to call if Life Flight or the ferry, and then who. I mean, he's got, I believe, that to share. So
that would be fantastic. Something visual that people can, chew on and read and have some opportunity to really sit with would be good.
Great. Any questions for Genevieve about legislation while we're talking about it? All right, hearing none, I guess the next is just a general strategy discussion. I think one thing I did want to bring up is that we have in a week discussion or a meeting with the DOT and the ferry service about the new tariff, which I think is 15% roughly increase. That is next week. I have personally emailed them my thoughts about, I think I've sent that to maybe everybody here, or at least some people here, my thoughts about unfunded pension liability and repairs and how they ought to be categorized. And I think, at least for me, that the points that I am going to be making are about that, about proper accounting of expenses and unfunded pension liability, as well as pushing to have resident ticket rates. Feels to me like that's the only way we're going to have reasonable rates for people who live here year round, is to have a system that's not divided up by the season or by on off, island originated, mainland originated tickets, which is what we used to have. And it seems like that is the best way, at least I think, forward. I know that the town has offered to facilitate and come up with some sort of process or card or mechanism for the ferry service to essentially identify people who are residents who are entitled to that. And so I think other islands have also offered to do that. So I think it would be not as heavy of a lift for the DOT and the ferry service, but those are the things that I think that I'm personally going to be pushing for. Not really looking for committee support necessarily. I mean, this is sort of for a different purpose, but I think it's just important while we're talking about ferry stuff is throw that out there for part of the conversation.
Is this a meeting you're having with them?
No, this is a public hearing about.
Okay, it's
Yeah,
the
this is
public
sorry,
hearing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
this is the
okay.
public hearing that is in.
That I have on the list.
Yes, that's right.
I'm glad you're bringing this up, Kay, because the birthing issue is important, but this tariff, this additional 15%, that's the number I got too, I think is huge, a huge issue, and we're kind of getting double barreled here, which makes things rather difficult. By my calculation, I think when I counted it up, if you've got a family of 4 with kids who are charged, round trip peak season is going to be basically $83.50. So that's a lot. That's a lot to pay to go to Hannaford's. So and I wrote a fairly lengthy letter the last time around, which we haven't spoken, but I sent a copy to you. Did you get that?
Yes, I did. Thank you.
Okay. And it also included a kind of an informal survey of other ferry systems around the country, because I was advocating at the time for a resident tariff, a senior citizen tariff, and a commuter tariff that was user friendly. And the only thing we got out of that, after I spent a lot of time doing all of that, was a commuter ticket that is now valid for 14 days as opposed to 7. And that was the only concession we got out of them that time around. I don't know how you want to go about doing it. I could send that in and just say more of the same. But anyway, I think it's a huge issue because we're not stopping here. I mean, the Margaret Chase Smith is still out of the water. Wait till we get the bill for that. We're probably going to get another tariff increase of 15 or 20% in the next 12 to 18 months. So anyway, I could go on and on, but I won't.
Yeah, it's certainly a concern. And I think, it's gonna be, it's hard to know. I mean, I get the feeling from seeing, reading the emails from the DOT and hearing what they're saying about this, that it's going to be a heavy lift to get them to change their mind about anything. And that's sort of been my experience with them, for years now. But I think we certainly need to be part of the process, and be pushing for that. I mean, we're not gonna do ourselves any favors by not showing up and participating. So I think that being there and offering either in person or written testimony, I think would be good.
What's the latest on the ferry? I mean, I know the new one is off the table now.
Yes, the new one's off the table for.
Mid-April is when the Maggie's supposed to come back.
Yeah, I mean, they've replaced the floor in the cabin compartment. They put new shafts in, they added bearings to the shaft, I guess, thinking that they've been unsupported, not supported enough. I mean, which is curious. I mean, the boat's been around for a long
I
time. for
feel
to be-
that shutter.
Yeah, so I guess that's
That's
been
right.
an ongoing issue. So they're adding bearings to the shaft, the shafts, and I can't
They're gonna
remember.
have to plan on keeping her in service a lot longer.
Yes, so in some ways,
And is the plating reasonable?
I think they've done that recently. They put maybe a couple $1 million into that boat last year.
Yeah,
I mean, every year, it makes, what has seemed like, very poor management seems like it makes a lot more sense in hindsight when your plan has fallen through, I guess.
Yeah.
When we need to keep the boat running because the new boat build is not happening. So in some ways that is, I guess, I don't know if it's a good thing. It is what it is, but. I should, how they categorize those expenses. But I throw that out there as that's where we landed on that. I did make that ask and there isn't money from the town for that at this point.
and just review again, if you would, so the ferry pretty much, it's a dead issue about it being on the mainland.
So my understanding is that it's a dead issue about, they're not planning on berthing ferries off island at this point. And it sounds like they're not going to push back against legislation that requires the boats to be berthed on the island, is what it sounds like.
Yeah.
So I know there was a bill that was introduced that would have pushed this down the road and said, you can't do it for the next 10 years. And I think the thought is, well, if the DOT and the ferry service say they're not going to do it and they're agreeable, let's not kick the can down the road. Let's just have the agreement right now. And to
Right.
the extent that they want to make that change in 10 years, let's have a full conversation about it and be changing legislation. So it's not something that is just default falling back to them just deciding
Right,
either as part of the tariff or, some sort of rulemaking.
Yeah.
Or not, right, or just doing it. Let's have it be in writing, well, we can just do that now, and then that'll be something we're not worried about without a much broader discussion with the legislature.
Yeah, I guess I would just clarify, I think they haven't necessarily in public meetings said they're reversing their position on it. They've just kind of indicated
Right.
that they are less likely to be opposed to legislation that requires it. And so it's not as though the legislation is not important because it, sort of reinforces that issue and
yeah, we could get
gets it
blindsided.
documented. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's nice to, if we're not anticipating a lot of pushback about that issue, it's nice to move that forward right now while we have people in office who are agreeable with that, or, it's hard to know what might change for all sorts of things are possible to change, but
Yeah.
we might as well move forward with that, I think.
Yeah.
And not kick the can down the road if we can just be done with the issue for at least without a major substantive discussion with the legislature, which seems like a good place to be for ferry berthing. Any thoughts about, I don't know, we've been talking about the tariff or general ferry issues while we're,
Well, I've got a call to the Coast Guard in Belfast, which is what was suggested. And they're pushed it down to Portland, and I still haven't received a word on the overtime situation for the crews. So I'm still waiting for the Coast Guard to give me an answer.
about we're talking 12-hour rule for
Yes.
emergency response?
Yes. And I suggested something to them and they said they would get back to me.
Okay,
And so I'm still waiting. I'm going to Lincolnville Select Board on the 14th of April to propose to them a wave buoy, which is being lent to us by Humane. And I'm not expecting any blowback or confrontation. I mean, everybody sounds like they want to go along with it. We just need to go through the steps of asking their select board.
Mhm.
Has there been any discussion about, under that 12-hour rule, the captain can override that in emergency, just have to make up for it within so many days later.
Yeah, I'm asking, I mean, the crews only work 7 hours now. And,
so that's true of our crew, not of other boats.
that's right, well, I'm just asking for Islesboro, I'm not asking them for Vinyl Haven or
Yeah, I
North
just throw
Haven.
that out there because I think the ferry service likes a cookie cutter approach to everything. Because it's easier for them than rather than having different protocols for the different.
Well,
islands.
too bad.
Yeah,
But I mean,
I'm with you. I'm just saying that's
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
might be out there.
At the moment, Fred calls Portland every time he wants to use the ferry and gets their permission.
Yes, that was something that was required by the ferry service.
Well,
Or the Coast Guard, I'm not clear what.
I don't think it should be required by the Coast Guard and,
So this was a broad discussion point at the Ferry Service Advisory Board about making that a requirement to call and getting the Coast Guard permission, and at the time, there were concerns about the sharing medical information, about the ability of Coast Guard personnel to assess the risks of an emergent medical situation, depending on what it was and what their training might be to decide. You know, and weren't the people who were the EMS boots on the ground better equipped to determine whether that was necessary or not?
And wouldn't the
Looks like
local
Fred Seeger may
captain,
want to weigh in on
Oh,
this.
hey, Fred, you're raising your hand. You were the right person for this conversation.
Sorry I'm late. I couldn't find my link, but I have a different perspective on that. And
Great.
this is only from working with the captains is they should be the ones that contact the Coast Guard. It isn't the responsibility of the ambulance crew technically to contact the Coast Guard for the ferry boat. The ferry boat should be contacting to see if they can exceed the 12-hour rule. And the reason we have never argued against that is because we will never know if they had called the Coast Guard or not, or whether they just flat out refuse us because they don't want to run. So it was easier for us to eliminate that problem with our ambulance drivers, who we trained to do that, rather than depend on them to do it and then really not had done it and say the Coast Guard told them they couldn't run. Just my thought.
why can't the captain make that call and just log it? And why did they even have to call the Coast Guard to do that? I don't understand.
I've never wanted to turn that Apple Card over because it's left up to us to find out whether the Coast Guard approves it or not, and not the captain. So all we have to do is call the captain back and say the Coast Guard gave us permission, which they always do because we log it. And then to me, that takes away the ability to say no.
I see.
The onus
Yeah.
is on them then.
Hey, Fred, do you have a decision tree about emergency response, about who to call? And what order you call that we might be able to share with the legislature? I mean, we don't need people's personal phone numbers or anything, but just as we're talking about a study.
Yep.
For emergency response on unbridged islands.
Yep, we have a call tree. I can't release the actual thing with the numbers on it because I don't have permission from everybody to do that. But
We don't need that.
the decision-making process, I actually put an algorithm together a few years ago, and I can send that to you. I'll do that. I actually can probably, this should be left alone. I, I I only say this because I depend on this process to work for us. I don't know if this is a good one to tip upside down and mention to anybody. I don't know. I'll leave it up to you guys. I'll send it to you and you can do with it you may.
Thanks. Yeah, we're just talking about a study for the state would put into place to investigate this, and that would be used for maybe legislation in the future if we're talking about provide emergency.
And remember one thing, the main reason that we call the Coast Guard is because there's supposed to be a medical triage. Where the ferry boat is not medically trained, they questioned whether our trips were legit or not. This has been going on for years. This isn't something that's just been in the last 10 years. This has gone on for years. And then in the negotiation process, I don't know if Janet's right there or not, but she was around when that happened, was that they wanted a triage process, and they said that calling the Coast Guard in South Portland, the people there that are medically trained could triage whether we really needed the ferry boat or not. And I guess I didn't have a problem with that, just other than the fact that I felt bad they didn't believe us. But I mean, it was a fair thing. And I can tell you the Coast Guard's never turned us down. Matter of fact, we ran 2 calls a couple of weeks ago in 1 week, and the ferry didn't even cancel the boats the next morning. They took us at night and they didn't cancel the boat the next morning. So I was impressed with that. Do I trust it? No, but I mean, we're working on it. But the reason they want us to use the Coast Guard is they want somebody medically trained that can clear the Margaret Chase Smith to run because it warrants the ferry boat being called out. I think for them, it probably is the most efficient system they could have asked for but sometimes the Coast Guard doesn't even know the medical stuff, but they trust us, and that's what matters to me. We've built that trust relationship with them that they trust us, and it makes it work.
Thank you for that background info, Fred. It's really helpful.
Okay.
Um, Anybody else have any thoughts, questions, concerns, ideas,
Well, something I'll be proposing to you guys is that this, to my mind, is all gotta be formalized. Along with the crew pay, the crew alcohol use, the sleep, everything's gotta be formalized. So right now, your crew can say, no, I don't feel like it. And we can't live that way. Now, that may not be Fred's experience, but yet that's the gray area that we operate under.
Right.
And I think, it's gotta be formalized. Now, I'm not doing anything, I'll just discuss it with you guys, but that's my feeling on it.
Peter is right with that. I agree with Peter on that because for a long time, sorry to cut in, Peter, for a long time, they could just do this at will. And when they actually put this process in place with the Coast Guard, with us calling them and giving them the medical information, then it goes back onto the ferry crew because we report to them the commander's name that we spoke with or the petty officer we spoke with, and we report what they said. It's very minimal. We are free to, the Coast Guard has cleared us. They're trusting us to do that call. But I do agree with Peter, as this could go backwards real quick, and I just think you've got to have a good process in place.
Thanks, Fred. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Hearing none. Let's see, next on the agenda is any comments from the public? Aren't many people here this meeting. No comments, so next meeting, I guess we should schedule it for a week out and hopefully we'll have the last text of those two bills to be discussing then. Does that work for everybody?
You said 1 week?
1 week from today?
Uh,
We upped it to 1 week last time, right? Or did we not? I can't remember.
I think we're still on a 2 week schedule.
2 weeks.
Yeah, we did 2 weeks.
Okay.
And so the soonest those bills, sorry, I'm cutting it. I'm driving, so I can't see. But I can see the road, which is helpful. But anyway, hi Fred. I hope you're enjoying your vacation. I wouldn't expect those bills. They're going to come back just as drafts, and we're going to have an opportunity to weigh in on them with the sponsors. They won't be public for at least a week after that. So I think we're still safe with a 2 week window. And then if anything pops before that, we could change it to a week if we needed to.
All right, 2 weeks it is. That work for everybody? What is that?
The 17th.
17th?
So, 17th.
Harbor Committee is at 6 o'clock or
Oh.
6:30, sorry.
Perfect. We'll be able to get out of here by 6:30.
So 4:30 on 17th.
4:30 on the 17th.
Okay,
With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
so moved.
Moved by Super, second by Earl. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
John, you get a roll call.
Yes.
Fred.
And Fred, too.
Yes.
Yeah, Fred, you can vote too.
Yes.
Thank you. Have a good night, everybody.
Yeah.
See ya.
Thanks.